All right, welcome to my YouTube. This is Melcher Moore. If you watched my last video, you know that I am transitioning into being an art dealer, not just an artist. And recently in my art dealings, I came across a Maurice Utrillo, who is a French Impressionist or post-Impressionist artist, depending on which literature you're looking at. And in my research for the valuation of the painting, I came across this article by John Merryman, The Moral Right of Maurice Utrillo. And one of the things that's interesting about Maurice Utrillo is that he comes from France, and the moral right in France is a little bit different than the moral right in the United States. The United States, upon death, I believe that the artist retains copyright for 70 years. In France, the moral right is in perpetuity, meaning that it is forever, art is forever, and unlike the artist, it never dies. And so upon the death of Maurice Utrillo, his moral rights were passed down to his wife, Lucy, I can't say Valadon, Susan Valadon was his mother, Lucy, anyway, so his wife's name was Lucy. She got the moral rights, and then she passed them on to his secretary, Jean Fabrice, and the moral rights under Jean Fabrice, he created a catalogue raisonné for his artwork and started going into these auction houses like Sotheby's and claiming fake. And he was being pulled out of these auction houses because he was saying that things were fake and he had the moral rights and he was the only one that could say that a Maurice Utrillo was a Utrillo. Anyway, there was this series of paintings that kind of showed up on the market that were painted towards the end of his lifetime he was being represented, Utrillo was being represented by this guy, his name is Petridos, and he was paying Maurice Utrillo in wine because Maurice was such an alcoholic. And so there's some articles that say that the quality of the paintings were going down because he was a drunkard and being paid in wine. But Petridos ended up with all of these paintings, and something about a treaty in between Japan and France being non-existent, Petridos started taking all of these paintings to Japan and trying to sell them, or selling them, and he was ultimately arrested over some maybe forgeries in 1973, and then he died. So when I was looking for provenance on this painting and trying to get authenticity, the Frick Museum did some research for me, and we did find the painting in the Petridos catalogue raisonné, but there was a disclaimer saying, hey, there is some litigation on this, but the guy's dead, so I don't know what's going to happen. Anyway, so that's kind of what this article is about. I think that was my takeaway. It was very complicated. You're horrible at this. I said, interrupt me, tell me any questions that you have, and you just let me talk.
So, I gotta say, I'm a lawyer.
You can't say, I don't think you can say that. We're not giving legal advice.
Well, there's no legal advice here, but I'm a lawyer. I found the article very confusing, and I didn't know. I looked up John Merryman, and unfortunately he's passed away because I would have wanted to punch him in the face. The thing I thought was crazy was this legal article. It has quotes in French, but it doesn't translate into English for an English article. So, he talked about these French courts decided, but, I don't know what that means.
Okay, well, number one, John Merryman is, if you look into him a little bit, he's famous for his legal research into the art world. So, and there's tons of articles by him. He's very well known. And I think that he's in good standing in the literary community. But you don't speak French?
Don't speak French, but it kind of cracked me up. Basically, you can talk a little more about it and things that collectors need to know, but it's like the French have a word for everything. And so, of course, we talk about moral rights in artists, but they have their own little term for everything.
Oh,
So.
the moral rights of the patronage, of acquisition, but the one thing about it being written in English and French, remember that this is a French painting, and so the moral rights of Maurice Utrillo are in French, and I guess it's just assumed that if you're dealing in French paintings, you speak French.
I mean, like the way I guess I would sum it up, and I got some questions for you about this. It's like authenticity. It seems like this is a big part of what it's all about. It's like authenticity and like who has the right to declare if something's authentic or not. I would welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that was interesting. So authentication of a painting is very important when you're dealing with these higher priced items because, now I'm drawing a blank. The provenance of a painting should be able to be traced back to like the artist's studio. So through receipts and literature and everything, or through exhibition catalogs. So with Maurice Utrillo, because he was creating such a vast amount of work, what happened is that there were a bunch of undeclared paintings. And so even though it's signed, one thing about the French is that it seems that the government has the ability to seize a painting and destroy it if it's considered inauthentic. And so the French, what I gathered, will allow a counterfeit item to be in circulation rather than accuse it of being a forgery and have the risk of destroying an authentic work. So I think that's a little interesting.
How about this? Just like two artists I really like that I think are interesting, and curious what your thoughts on this are. But so Banksy, right? He's got this like thing. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called like pest control. That's like his name he gives to like his office that determines if things are authentic or not.
Well, Banksy is interesting because he was painting on so many found objects during his drug addiction. I think he was homeless maybe at one point, or at least in the streets an awful lot. And he was painting on like found objects. So if you go into certain places and they're selling Banksys, it is hard to authenticate whether like he traded this for that, and I don't know a lot about Banksy, but it is kind of along the same.
Sorry, I'm talking about one of the things that's kind of cool about Banksy. So as I understand it, he did all the street art, but they won't authenticate that. Because one, they don't want to implicate him in any kind of crimes, but also like it wasn't meant for that purpose. So as I understand it, only things that are officially released through the studio will be authenticated by pest control, and then that pest control is happy to authenticate. Although I'm unclear if they actually want to see the physical work, and so.
Well, the Warhol Foundation, I believe, they were doing that. They were authenticating work, and then they authenticated something and then got sued. And so after a certain period, they're not authenticating work anymore. So if it's not in circulation, if it's not in the catalogs at this point, and then you show up with a new one, I don't know what happens. It is a good question.
Well, maybe you can tell me just a little more about like where the rubber meets the road as far as like what this actually means. If you're a collector and like you're trying to wrestle with authenticity, you want to buy something, like how does that process work?
You do have to be careful, when you get on these online websites and you see things like signed or attributed to or in the manner of. You got to be real careful because that is sort of an indication that there isn't any paperwork that comes along with it. If you're really looking at a very expensive item that that's maybe going to be sold to a museum or donated to a museum, I think that there should be some paperwork that comes along with it. If it doesn't have paperwork, then maybe if you have the funds, you could do some DNA testing, or I don't even know how much that costs. So that's something that would be interesting to look into. You should read I think it's called the Lost Portrait or the Lost something, but it's about Caravaggio and how Michelangelo Merisi became Caravaggio. Michelangelo Merisi, or M, was murdered someone, and he fled the city of Nice and went to Rome, and then centuries later, a painting shows up in Ireland in a church, and then they've got the same painting in another church, and everybody thinks that it's an after, like painted by in the manner of or of the school of or a forgery or whatever. And then through these women's search of archives in these Italian homes, they found out, no, this painting is real. And so now we have x-rays and we've got DNA samples, and they found out that Michelangelo Merisi is Caravaggio. So I don't know if that answered your question. Maybe I went on a rant.
Yeah, well, how about, just curious to hear if you had any thoughts about, and we can maybe talk, I can tell you some things I've read about moral rights in the U.S. and just like anything you've heard about moral rights in the U.S. Go ahead.
Well, the moral rights, I do believe that they're at 70 years, then the copyright's over, and that's why we see so many forgeries in the this isn't racist, it just is where they're doing it in the Chinese art market, creating bronzes from statues of photos. Frederick Remington is a very forged artist. His bronzes are mass produced in the international community out of China, and so I don't know if you can pass the copyright down after, can you reapply for copyright after that 70 years is up? Maybe.
I guess just the one thing to say, again, not to give legal advice, and here's some things that I've read, and maybe get some thoughts from you, but as I understand it, in the U.S., we have a law that gives less rights to an artist than what they have in France, but it's called the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990, and then the big deal is it only applies to visual works, not music or anything like this. But an important part of it is the right to attribution. So if you're the artist, you have the right to say, hey, that's my painting. And similarly, you have the right to say, hey, that's not my painting. And you also, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but somebody pays a lot of money for a painting. They own that painting, but to your point, they might not own.
But they don't own the image, and so that comes down to licensing. So when you buy a painting, if you don't want that to be reprinted, you have to buy the licensing as well. So you might have to pay a little bit more for that. So if an artist creates a painting, they sell the painting, but if that artist has taken a very good image of that, they have the reproductive rights. And so I haven't read VARA, the Visual Artists' Rights Act, but it does have something to do with title. I think the main case that happened with VARA is that building in New York with the graffiti.
Is it called 5 points or something?
Something point, 15 point, 5 point, something like that. All of these graffiti artists were painting on these walls, and I don't know if they had permission. I assume that they must have, because when a developer came in and purchased the property, their idea was to destroy the artwork, and these artists kind of did that stop doing what you're doing service. What's that called? Where you tell somebody to stop doing something.
Like
cease and desist. Yeah. And they said, hey, cease and desist. But then in the middle of this litigation, the guy went and whitewashed all of these paintings. So they ended up with a $6.9 million settlement. But their art was destroyed, and then the guy built some sort of tower that.
And I guess I'll just add on that. So again, it's even if you pay a lot of money for a painting, you own that painting, you might not own the copyright, but then also, for example, if you had a portrait of somebody and you wanted to draw a silly mustache on there and you're the rich collector, you still might have some legal threat because the artist has a right to protect somebody from destroying their work while they're alive.
Interesting.
And back to what you were saying though about the place in New York, there are special provisions.
We're almost out of time. Finish that thought.
Yeah, there's special provisions for works on buildings, and basically, if there's no way to remove the work, then there's not protection. But if there is a way to remove the work, there might be protection for the artist. So if you're going to buy a building and there's some murals, that's something you might want to watch out for. But I guess I'd just love to hear your final thoughts on who do you go to if you're having some of these issues? You want to buy a painting? Who do you seek out? What are the?
Are you? I guess you would go to an IT attorney if you were trying to get licensing.
What about in terms of determining authenticity? What kind of professionals do you use?
Well, you can use an appraiser. Certainly call me.
How do I get in touch with you?
It slices, it dices.
How do I get in touch with you? We just met on the street, so I assume you're, you can assume I'm an attorney, and I can assume you're an appraiser.
I mean, if you're watching this video, you know how to get in touch with me. But, I mean, yeah, you can talk to an appraiser, you can talk to an IT attorney, you can talk to, I guess, art dealers and art gallerists know about this stuff. Gallerists, though, I don't know their ethics. There are some galleries that I've been into that do sell questionable work.
Well, thanks for your time today, Al. I learned some things, and maybe learned a little more than I did from the article, but it was great chatting.
Any other questions? No? Thank you. I think I was supposed to say that. Thanks for meeting with me today, and subscribe and like if you like this video, and hopefully we'll see you guys again. Comment below if you have anything to say. Bye.